Hi, Jim here, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast, career advice from people in the business. This week, I'm speaking to educator, producer, and film industry data researcher, Stephen Follows. Stephen's produced over 100 short films and 2 feature films. He also co-runs Catsnake, a story agency. He's taught at all the major film schools and specialises in film industry data. So I chatted to Stephen about some of the insights that data brings him, especially in relation to indie film production. And we also talked about Stephen's recently released Horror Movie Report, which is a comprehensive case study of the horror genre. He looks at data of every horror film ever made, and it looks at development, production, distribution, and profitability. Enjoy. So let's start off. Tell me a bit about your route into film.
Well, when I was a teenager, I knew I wanted to do 2 things. I wanted to do film and thinking, and I didn't know what either of them meant. And everyone said, go to university and study thinking, and then just do this film thing on the side. So I did the opposite because, pathological demand avoidance. So I went to film school and I was a producer and I did bits of writing and set up a production company after that, and then did short films that evolved into viral videos and adverts. And that company still exists, and I still run that with my business partner. There's about 10 of us, and we've now evolved into a company that raises money for charities using storytelling. So that is TV adverts, but it's also strategy and stuff. But over the sort of 20 years that took to evolve and change, I was moving further and further away from film, and I like film, and I like the film business, and I like filmmakers. So I decided to sort of do the thinking part in film. And so I, maybe 15 years ago, something like that, I set up a blog where I was just sharing things I thought was interesting, and I was helping friends with their business plans and all that sort of stuff. And then it sort of grew from there. And I started to get asked to do bits of number crunching. I found causes that I believed in to do with gender equality and other forms of inequality that I could bring my skills to. A couple of years ago, Guinness World Records reached out, and I now work with them, which is the dream gig. They're just the Uber geeks, and I'm an Uber geek within one field, and it's a match made in heaven. And so I write some of the tiny parts of the book each year, and and I also had a route through teaching as well. During when we were setting the production company up, we didn't have any money, didn't make any money for years, so I used to teach at the Met Film School because it was at Ealing Studios where we were. And so I have a sort of a hand in education the whole way through, which is sort of a mix of all those things. So yeah, it's kind of strange. My mum doesn't understand what I do, and every now and then I'm in the news or mention something, and she's like, "Why did they come to you?" I'm like, I don't know. So I don't know if that's the potted history. I don't know if that's enough detail or too much.
No, that is enough, because I think looking at your website, you've got a very, not strange career, but you've got eclectic. That's a good word for it.
That's a kind word.
Yes, a kind word. And obviously, data comes up, and like all this research you do and stuff. So, does that? How much does that inform the creative side now for you?
It's great because it's a great question because I actually love the interplay of the two. So I like 2 things. I like figuring out how things work, and I like then using that or helping other people use that. And so almost everything I'm either bringing order to chaos or chaos to order. And it's important for me to know what I'm doing in each space. So for example, on my story agency, we are doing a lot of systematic stuff, understanding audiences, but then we use creatives and human writers, and we're not using AI and things like that to write. And so it is that interplay, and it's the same with the film industry. It's the business of art, and business is about figuring something out once and doing it a billion times, and art is about destroying everything every time. And so how do you sustainably create, sustainably being a career or being an IP or whatever, or even just a company, that interplay that you can figure out quite a lot of detail what did work, but you can't ever know what will work beyond the fact that it's a line somewhere from those 2 points, is the joy that keeps it going for me. So I like that most people don't understand enough about the data. And so I was teaching in NYU a few years ago, and someone asked me, what are you teaching there? And I was like, well, I was teaching filmmakers how to use data and lawyers how not to. And it's exactly that. I would walk from one classroom where I'd start with like screenwriters, and they would be like, I just want to do this. I was like, well, that's never worked, or like maybe you should look at this, trend or whatever. And then I'd walk across to one of the other buildings, and the lawyers would be like, what's the formula for this? And I'm like, there isn't one. You have to find someone you believe in and back them. And I then would go home and be like, that was a great day because I didn't resolve anything.
Nice. So thinking about indie filmmakers
Mhm.
specifically, How could an indie filmmaker use data to help them?
Well, I think the best thing to think of, because when we talk about data, a lot of the language is deliberately or at least unintentionally, some of it's unintentionally standoffish. It's like, well, you didn't do maths, you don't have a PhD, you don't even think of yourself as a scientist. And, we use phrases like big data. And actually, there isn't much data in the film industry. I have friends who are astrophysicists who laugh at how little we know about the film industry. And they're studying the early universe and they're like, yeah, we got loads of data. So it is data, and data is important, but fundamentally what we're talking about are people who've trod the path we want to go down, and what's happened to them. What are the desire lines that they've done, like the lines that go through fields or whatever that everyone's walked on. Why has everybody sort of swerved at that point? And when you get there, you realize, oh, there was a hole, and you're like, okay, well, if I could have seen that in advance, maybe I would have done a different thing. So data is the correct word, but I would prefer to frame it as look what's gone before and what happened, and then understand what that means for you. And I'm still sort of forming it into a theory, and it's not going to be a theory of everything, but the closest I've got to so far is that you need to know everybody's expectations, which is entirely based on the past, and then you need to, in each case, decide whether you're going to deliver or subvert. And you can do either, like, and in every case. And most of the things you should probably deliver because you can't change everything. You can't deliver a 23-minute feature film. But if you just deliver everything they're expecting, at the very best it's going to be is derivative. But if you choose carefully where to subvert, I'm going to subvert the casting here, the title, the feeling, I'm going to subvert the distribution methodology, whatever it will be. That's where you really can find your voice, your passion. You can make money, art, whatever the thing you're trying to make is. So the key is not to have your head in the sand and just make whatever you want to make. It's look what's gone before and then say to yourself, I am delivering on that path. What's the thing? Or I am subverting that path and I'm fine with it. I think it's just
Yeah.
being conscious, I think, rather than being an automaton following a formula.
Yeah, it's a tough one because maybe you leave university. I'm going to change the world with this film, and I'm going to ignore everything that's come before, and I'm going to do something special, and people are going to believe in it, and I'm going to get an agent from it, etc., etc. But then what happens is you make a film and you go to a sales and distribution market, and they go, "Well, it's not a copy of this thing that we know how to sell. So
Mm-hmm.
sorry, tough luck. You're not going to sell it anywhere."
Or
And at the
worse, they
same
give
time,
you a deal.
or worse, they give you a deal and it doesn't
Because
sell,
they'll
or it
screw
does,
you.
yeah, screw you over. So it is tough to get that line in the middle, isn't it, between something that's sellable and that people actually want
Yeah.
to watch, but it's also got originality in it and that you enjoy working on.
I mean,
Um,
it's worth saying out loud, like, if you're going to follow the rules to the letter and try and copy everything that's worked, don't get into film. It doesn't reward that well. It's really hard work. That's not reliable. Go become an accountant, or I'm not sure what people do when they follow the rules because I'm not one of them. But like, I'm not saying do everything that everyone else has done before, but at the same time, if you like say exactly as you just said, I'm going to be this iconoclast. There's a queue, and it's like those people that climb Everest, and they're like, I'm about to get to Everest Peak, and then there's this big queue of people. You're like, yeah, there's lots of people that have had that model. You're not the first one to have invented this.
yeah, definitely. So all right. So then, based on what you know, and I know I'm trying to get uh, a an answer out of something that's a much bigger question here. So I appreciate that, but I want an answer. Is I'm an indie filmmaker. Genre. What genre should I make? What's going to be the best one for me to make a return or to actually
Yeah.
see anything
Well,
out of
there's
it?
there's two answers to that one, and one is the unhelpful, honest one, and then the other one is the more helpful, but kind of. So the unhelpful one is whatever you want. Like
Mhm.
ultimately, it is an industry of passion, and if you're going to make something cynically, you're not going to do it very well, or even strategically. You're not going to put the stupid amount of time and energy into it. And I get that question a lot sometimes when there's a project that I've done for my blog or whatever that's taken a lot of time, and people are like, why did you do that? I'm like, I don't know, it was fun. Some people do Lego, I do this. And
Mm.
if you were to say to someone, if you just try and force someone to pay someone to make Lego pieces, you can't afford to do that. You need someone who's obsessed. And so you need to make whatever you're obsessed with because it's going to be ridiculously, stupidly hard. And so you need to have that little dose of passion and naivety and drive. So that's the first answer. The second answer, which is probably closer to what you're trying to get at, which is that if you know nothing else, like if the only piece of information you have is the genre, then horror is the one to go for. It's the one that, well, of films that reach cinemas, which is everything, every piece of data can be cut up, and you looking at
Mm.
this time period or this classification, and anything what we include as a feature film affects things. And so if we were to include everything that somebody thought was a feature film, maybe horror would do far worse, because it's more likely people have picked up an iPhone, gone into the woods with a couple of friends and said, we made a film and it's a horror film, than they've gone in and said, we've made a Western, because of the nature of the budget. But if we look at films that reach the professional realm, which we can use as a proxy of going to cinemas, then horror is the one that most frequently returns and also has the chance of going stratospheric, because it's more likely to be on a lower budget. Like Avatar 2 is never going to double its money. It can't. There's not enough money. But if you make a film like Terrifier 3, it's possible to double the money you put into it.
Yeah, absolutely. See, I could be really clever with the editing here and just reduce all your answers to one word. I go, he definitively said horror. That's what he said.
I mean, you wouldn't be the first. And also, the film industry is full of people telling stories about how they tell stories. So
yes,
I'd rather you didn't, but I wouldn't be shocked if you did.
Right,
it would undermine your brand personally,
yes,
though, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, good. I feel safer then.
Not going to do that. So, when you've looked at indie film, is there anything that that surprised you, or that you think would surprise people in that information that you found?
That's a really, really good question. Let's have a think. I think that when you try and figure out a model, or you not literally just an algorithmic formula, but you try and work out what works, it's amazing how much breaks whatever model you come up with. And I know there are films like Napoleon Dynamite, which is a film that all the analysts who write recommendation algorithms hate. There isn't an algorithm, there isn't a recommendation algorithm on the planet that can tell you if you're going to like Napoleon Dynamite or not, even if it knows everything you've rated before. It's a sort of like, it's Marmite, but on, random. And that's the extreme one, but there's lots of films like that. And I think it's really pleasing that it's more matchmaking. I've made a film. There is an audience out there, but it's not as simple as put it on the conveyor belt. There is the pipeline, and then the audience will watch it and they will give it the vote, which is always the way that the world works. Partly out of convenience, but also we have a single IMDb score, and we say that is the score the audience gave it, or Rotten Tomatoes, or whatever. And actually, what is the audience? The audience isn't a group of people. It's different. Like in every film, it's different. And you can see the same film in the same context with your mate and disagree about whether it was any good. I've had huge fun, like I'll say arguments, probably debates with people about this, watching the same movie and coming out with totally different impressions. And we saw, so a group of my friends and I, we were at Cannes a number of years ago, and we saw Foxcatcher, which is the Steve Carell film about the wrestling. It's a true story about the American wrestling team, and the coach was weird, and he shot one of the Channing Tatum in this film. Mm-hmm. Now, there was 4 of us, and we'd all had different information about the film. I knew it was about wrestling, but that was it. Someone else knew that there was a shooting. Someone else knew the whole story. I can't remember. Anyway, there were all 4 of us had a different piece of information. And I thought it was incredibly boring, because I just was like, it was just a slow burn, and I didn't know where it was going. And then suddenly out of nowhere, someone got shot, and I was like, what the hell was that? The people who knew there was a shooting was incredibly tense, because they didn't know who was going to get shot when, or like it could have happened at any point. And then the people who knew the story inside out were kind of gripped by the performances. And so we all walked into this screening not knowing anything, basically not knowing anything, but knowing one piece of information more than the other. And we walked out having had fundamentally different cinematic experiences. I couldn't tell you about the performances because I was just like, why is this so boring? and so one of us, I saw a boring drama. Someone else saw a captivating drama. Someone else saw a thriller. And it was the same movie sitting next to each other. And that really highlighted to me that there isn't like a truth. There is a group of people that you need to find, and it's different every film.
So with that in mind, audience, should indie filmmakers find that audience before they make the film? And how do they do that?
So the film industry itself, as a group of people, is a load of middle people, like middlemen and women, who you have to rely on. And sometimes they're screwing you, and sometimes they're helping you, and sometimes they're doing both. But fundamentally, the relationship is between you and the audience. It's just that those people are a necessary function. You don't own a cinema. You don't know how to get a Kazakhstan distribution agreement or whatever. So fundamentally, your audience relationship is the key one. And if you can sidestep as many of those things as possible, whether it's through Patreon, Substack, whether it's having, selling direct, whatever, then that's great. You may not be able to reach the certain heights, and certainly you won't be able to get a sort of the scale of cinema advertising or release. But the more you can build a sustainable connection with your audience and understand what they want and they understand you, the more you've taken control of your entire career. But at the same time, if you can't cut out all those middle people, they are there. And even if they're wrong, which they're often not, because it is their job, they're not doing it to screw you. Then there is information. If they're telling you to change the title of your movie, there's a reason. And they may have bad suggestions, but they have identified a real problem. So if you can sidestep all the white middle people, brilliant. If you have to please any of them, make sure you try and understand what they actually want and why. Might be that they're lazy. It might also be that they just know that calling it the table is not going to sell, and they haven't got the time, and they can't be bothered to explain to you. So they've come in and said, like, everybody dies. That's the new title, and you're like, no, that's crap. But spend the time to go, okay, but how did you get there? Why? And then they're like, well, it needs to be clear it's a horror film, and it's like, all right, well, give me 3 days, and I'll come back to you with 10 options with that, and then you get the title you like. The killer table, the table where everyone dies. I don't know. I'm clearly that's not my forte. But yeah, so I think understanding those people, because you can't argue with them because they just won't do a deal with
you. Yeah. Good advice. So I'll make another question that's probably not got a simple answer to
it. Don't worry, they're my specialties.
Yes. Film festivals, indie filmmakers, is it worth it? It's a lot of money. You've got to pay loads of cash out to get into them. If you're lucky enough to get into them, what does that actually mean for you, financially? What's your opinion on that, or what have you found from that?
Well, I mean, they serve an interesting function and a set of functions. They're a discovery methodology for people discovering that your film exists and seeing it. They're a validation methodology. You and the audience vote, or people talk about it. They also serve as a way of us meeting each other in an international business. Everyone going to a small number of festivals, or if you're in a local community or a subgenre, going to the festival that is the key festival for that thing will really help you embed in that world. And they also provide knowledge, because if you go to a market and you walk around it, you're like, oh, that's how they sell movies. I get it. And it's really depressing, but it's also really interesting because you get to sort of learn it. So they serve multiple functions, and where you are in your career will dictate what's important to you. I think the myth of like you go, I mean, I grew up people telling me about the indie movies of the 90s, and the template I was told was that you make this amazing movie on credit cards or paid for by dentists. You go to Sundance, you get into Sundance. It's like an amazing screening, and then you hold the negotiation in the lobby with all of the distributors offering deals, and you don't leave without a deal. And like that may have happened on 2 or 3 films, but it didn't really work then. And now there are about 10 times as many movies, and I don't know, comparably many more routes to market. And also that relied on you getting to Sundance. Like looking at the odds, I mean, the number of people that submit to Sundance is in the tens of thousands. Like the odds you getting in is next to zero. And then the odds on it, like how many films at Sundance are play and then never heard of again. So it's not that you shouldn't have that dream. It's just that isn't plan A, right? I need to know that's not or at least that's not your only plan. And so thinking about what plan B would be, it would be like, okay, well, I do need to do networking. Well, that's okay to go to festivals, and I'm going to meet people that maybe 10 years later I'm going to form real careers with, whereas we all go up. Fine, I can do that. I'm going to learn how the film business works. Well, you only need to go to 1 or 2 once or twice. Like you should go to more if you want to, and then you'll learn more. But the first time, let's say the first time you go to the Cannes market and you walk around, that will do 90% of the learning you ever need to do of getting the framework in your head, the paradigm. And then about meeting people, you've got to re-up those relationships. They've got to have a reason for meeting you. If you meet them every year and tell them you're making a film and you never make a film, you're teaching them the wrong lesson. So breaking down why you're going, why you're submitting your film, what are the odds, then you can be a bit more rational. But it's kind of sad that there's no point in the process where somebody takes things off your hands and says, don't worry, son, get in the car, we'll take you there. It doesn't work like that ever. No, everything is a grind.
Yeah, you're right. And I guess the thing I'm finding with now everything's for indie films, it's mostly straight onto streaming, is you get told, take the laurels off the poster, nobody cares. The sales and distributors, no, not interested, unless it's one of the big 5 or however.
Even then, I see posters on the tube and they say Cannes Film Festival, and they've got like a sad woman on the cover, and I don't think that's selling anything more than at the Curzon or the Everyman or something small. I can't test this ever, but I think winning Cannes is functionally irrelevant Because if it's a good film anyway, like if you let's assume, which is not always the case, the one that wins Cannes is the best film. It's going to get good reviews and it's going to get good word of mouth. I wonder whether for the audience it does nothing. Now it may have helped for attracting distributors, getting a better deal. Like there's many good reasons, and also we should celebrate great art. But when it comes to distribution, I'm not sure winning Cannes helps. And so anything down from that, which is a way of saying everything. I mean, winning an Oscar qualifying festival certainly changes the game. Now you are qualifying, but it's not the goal in and of itself. Mm.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because for me, if I put a film on, we watch a film, I wouldn't go, "Oh, I've picked this film because it won Cannes."
Yeah,
I'd go,
can
"Oh,
you
this
imagine?
one," yeah, we'd watch it and I go, "Oh, this one can," and then we'd make a judgment based on. You go, "Oh yeah, I can see why that one can," or you go, "Oh yeah, it's really good." Um,
Can you imagine
so
that? I mean, like, I think that test is great. That test of finding a civilian who you
mm,
probably are in a relationship with, because two filmmakers, that's complicated. But if you find a civilian and ask them to describe your movie back to you or describe why they chose a movie yesterday, I promise you, it's really depressing. It's kind of like that had Judi Dench. This one's a thriller.
mm,
That one looks kind of sexy, and like you have put your heart and soul into it. But the thing is that it's not that they don't care about you, all the nuance and all of the art that you're going to do. It's that that's not going to help get them in the cinema. Once they're sitting down, right, now you're in charge. You're in charge of what they see and hear for 2 hours. Like you're a god to them. But
mm,
getting them in, that's got to be tailored to them and the way they speak. And you're right, I can't think of anyone in my life that would be enough for me to say, go see this, it won Can, and then stop talking. What I'd probably do is, and I love it, and it moved me, and this and that. But Can itself would do nothing. I just sort of look
mm.
at it and sort of shrug slightly.
Yeah, I'd be cynical because I'd
Yeah.
imagine it to be a certain type of movie. Be like, "Oh,
Yes.
okay, so it's going to be long and it's going to be. I might love it, but who knows?" So talking about distribution, getting your film out there. What what platform is there any info on what platforms are the most beneficial for indie filmmakers, or is there any sort of
Oh, it
methodology there that
changes so
works?
quickly. I don't know if this is better or worse, but 30 years ago, there would only have been a single route. There were set windows of release that happened at certain times, and you sort of got on the single conveyor belt, and that was it. Now there's a myriad of options, but they keep changing. And so there was one year where at Sundance, Amazon bought almost everything, and then the next year they bought nothing. And like they don't know what they're going to do. And so you can't rely on a single named platform. That's not to say anything good or bad about Amazon. That's just to say they change their minds and they learn things and they're still figuring it out. And also new things come up, but ultimately it's the same audience. They want things conveniently in a way they like. So I would loathe to give any specific recommendations. Partly I don't know which are the best ones, but also even if I did, it would be different in 6 months.
Mm,
I think the point is think about your audience, think about where they are, talk to recent filmmakers. I mean, that would be my number one tip would be find someone who's just ahead of you in the journey and email them or call them. Most people might ignore you, might not. But my experience with filmmakers is, first of all, they love to gossip. So if they do hate their distributor, get them on a Zoom, take them for a drink, whatever. They'll tell you. But also they're very generous generally with their information. Like it's a bit self-aggrandizing, but also fundamentally kind, I think, because they're like, well, I wish I'd known this and I wish I'd done that. And also you're networking and you're not competing. You just, how many filmmakers are you actually competing with for the things you care about? So you care about funding. Well, films aren't funded by a single person that will go to one or the other. You're competing by being picked up by distributors. I mean, you'd have to be exceptionally unlucky to have had another film made at the same time for the same film market. So the 3 month window that you get them to finish, they've also got a comparable rival, and you lose a deal from that rather than taking both. And then also for the audience, that's not really. So you're not competitors, and if anything, you can really support each other. So I would suggest reaching out to past filmmakers and experienced execs, and having yeah, I mean, one of the things I did, for my recent horror movie report, I looked at the correlation between experience and profitability on future films, and I found that for writer, producers, directors, being a first time creative in that realm, first time meaning making a feature film, so you could have done TV or whatever, had functionally no difference. Like it's a first time director means nothing. It means nothing good. It means nothing bad. It's like saying a blonde director. It's like okay. But the one place it did make a difference was that when there was an experienced exec producer on the project, it seemed much more likely to be one of those mega hits.
mm.
Now, I don't know if they're good at picking the projects, like they're like, oh, this one's good, I'll jump on it, or whether they're transforming the projects. This is some things you should do. Here's some people you should call, or it's a bit of both. I'm sure they're not coming on the average, they're random projects, but at the same time, I'm sure they make a difference. But an experienced exec producer is one of the few things that actually, if you look at experience, actually correlates with better success outcomes.
Yeah. Okay. So since you brought up the horror report, are there anything that popped out of that surprised you in particular about horror?
I mean, the diversity of horror was huge, and it's not that I didn't know that, but just like I think we sometimes have narratives in the industry that like, oh, horror is a group of people, like they are the horror fans or they are the horror filmmakers. But when you go and meet that group of people, it's so diverse in so many ways, and the kinds of films and the kind of experience, like even like, I mean, saying that I don't like horror films, that's fine. Everyone's able to say what they want, but it's not much far off saying I don't like films. It's what you're probably saying is I don't like feeling adrenaline while watching films, like or something like that. And maybe adrenaline's not the right one, cortisol, I'm not sure. But it's there's a particular type of experience. But that is such a huge, deep, complex place. Whether I mean, on the one hand, you've got snooty terms like elevated horror, like The Lighthouse, and then the other end, you've got equally bad but for different reasons term torture porn, where it's sore and hostile, and everything in between, monster movies, and like this. We're exploring what it is to be human. And so to put it, we have to have labels in life, but to put it under the banner of horror, I kind of feel like I should have written, and I kind of have, but put it under one banner. Like this is a type of horror report, this type of horror report. Like it's such a huge, deep, vast space, creatively and production wise, that when people are like, oh, that's a genre film, and then they move on, you're like, uh, there's a world there, like in Men in Black, when they got that little thing around the cats thing. There's like a whole world. It feels a bit like that when people say horror.
Yeah, and I hate the words elevated horror.
Yeah,
I hate them.
I know.
I hate them so much because I think it's really it's sort of condescending to people who make regular horror, which can be really fun. And it also, I think it's a bad thing for students to hear as well, because it makes you think that there's something wrong with just a good old fashioned horror film.
Yes.
You've got to make it a certain way, or
it's also come from the wrong place. It's come from a snooty place of it's a sort of false logic. I'm a critic who likes art. I have somehow inexplicably liked a horror film. Now, I could update my image of horror films on myself, but instead I shall come up with a term. This is not like the others. Like it's just, I mean, I understand it, and it is also a consequence of diversification. Like in the 1950s, there was only the pop chart, there was popular music, and now we have much more subvariants, and that's all good. And I'm slightly ribbing critics here, and I don't think they're all just snooty. But at the same time, it doesn't come from a good place. In the same way, torture porn doesn't come from a good place. It comes from a dismissive place, which is sometimes appropriate, sometimes not. But yeah, I really bristle at the phrase as well.
Yeah, definitely. And looking at horror cast. So, are there any insights around? So, my methodology in the past has been, I get horror, make a horror movie. I get a cult star. You're going to probably tell me this is all wrong, but I go for a cult. So the last one's got a Doctor Who in it, right? So I go for a Doctor Who. My theory is, right, I'm going for something that a lot of people will recognise, that may have some fan base with it, and that is also travelled internationally, rather than somebody from a soap in the UK maybe who's only known in this country, and that audience wouldn't necessarily like that genre. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
First of all, don't worry. Partly because I can't disprove anything, but second of all, that makes it sound very sound logic to me. Certainly, I think the traveling and like working with someone who's thinks they're a big star because they're big over here would be all the pain of working with them and none of the advantage outside your home territory. So yeah, that definitely tracks. I have an entirely non-data backed theory here, which is that the casting, when it comes to levels of fame and their social media reach, all the things that are outside of their talent and appropriateness for the role, is irrelevant to the audience. I don't think the audience care. I think it's vital for the machinery of the internal workings of the film industry to give people confidence. Why should I invest in this? Why should I distribute this? Why should I exhibit this? Why should I promote this over that one? I think and it's just a personal opinion,
Hmm.
that is just about, like, it's a very risky business with a lot of unknowns, and they're fearful, and they want to keep their job and pay their mortgage, so they go for the what's perceived as the less risk. I actually think the only thing the audience care about is how good it is for the role they're doing, and good isn't necessarily like, are they a great actor? It's like, does it work? So Paris Hilton didn't work in a horror film, not because she's a terrible actress. She is, but that's not the reason it didn't work. It's because it didn't. You're always watching Paris Hilton. Whereas when you have someone who just fits in a role, you don't care if they're famous or not. You are like,
Mm.
wow, that person, because it's a willing suspension of disbelief. So I think it therefore is vital to think about international fame and cult status, but we have to remember the reasons why that's the case, and then really try and understand who we're trying to impress. If we're trying to impress a sales agent and they tell you they don't care about Doctor Who, but they do care about Twitter followers, or vice versa, you need to take that on as gospel if it's that person you're trying to impress. And if they all have the
Mm.
same opinion, they all share that opinion, then that is effectively gospelly true to you. But I mean, I know it must have some effect, and there are some actors I will go and see no matter what, but that's mostly because they are shorthand for something else. Jason Statham, Bruce Willis, they're shorthands for a type of movie experience. Whereas if one of them in their prime was in a very strange film, like Adam Sandler's a good example, when he was in Uncut Gems, how many people were like, well, I don't care what the film is, I just want to see Adam Sandler. And then they watched it and were like, great, I watched Adam Sandler. I don't think that happened. Maybe some of them started it, but I
Yeah,
don't think many of them. So I think it is about understanding that it's not about the product, it's about the product's journey, but that therefore still makes it essential. And
yeah.
your logic is sound to me, and sounds defendable to an investor or to a third party, which arguably, as I said, that's the job. They just need to know that you're on top of this. Like, do I trust this guy? And they're like, yeah, that sounds like he's thought about it. Checks out. Okay, what do you need?
Yeah, and I would say I've had the other experience. I've had a sales agent or maybe distributor agreement where they've asked for cast listed with social media accounts
Oh
and
yeah, definitely.
numbers.
That's definitely happening.
Yeah,
People are being cast for that reason.
yeah,
People are buying followers for that reason. Like, that's 100% what they're doing. And I think
mhm,
they're doing it out of fear, because what else can they use? Especially
yeah,
if it's a pre-sale, they haven't seen the film, and many genres like horror and certainly low budget is execution dependent. Not the executions you're thinking of, but like the actual doing of the film. Is the actual film any good? So in the absence of any other information, I kind of understand why they run away to this thing I don't like that they do.
yeah.
I kind of get
No,
it.
yeah, and I would say from somebody who's made a couple of films, somebody who's made films put cult stars in them, the value actually as a filmmaker also comes in that if you're trying to get a location or you're trying to convince someone to help you make the film and you're making the
Oh
film on
yes, yes,
peanuts,
yes.
you can go, oh, it's got Sylvester McCoy in it, and the people at the pub, it's just silly. They go, oh, Doctor Who.
No,
He
it's
might not
real.
even be
No,
in the
no.
scene you're shooting there, but it does open doors and it gives the people who help you something to sort of
And that's
cling on
great,
to.
because they're really getting that. If they really want
Mm,
to meet, or at least know that their pub was Sesame McCoy, and he's okay with being paid for trading on that name, that's
mm.
superb. That's great. That is the true entrepreneurial spirit of a filmmaker.
Is there any within that horror report? Are there any types? We talked about the subgenres of
Mhm.
horror. Are there any types of horror that do better than others?
Well, I will refer the member to my previous answer where I said make what you want, what you love. Now I've said the Hail Marys, I'll answer the question. I mean, obviously, the things that are made on a lower budget tend to have a better chance. If they're going to make money, the money will go further because there's less to pay back. So, found footage films tend to go, when they go astronomical. They're the ones that are in the top, like in the sort of greatest of all time, like Paranormal Activity, or Blair Witch, or anything like that. Obviously, things with low cost, open water, or anything like that, it's just easier. It's been a smaller, cheaper film to make initially. Although let's remember that the distribution isn't necessarily any cheaper. Promoting a film is promoting a film, and they might
Mm,
put less resources into it, but they're not going to put less because you spent less on the camera or the sets. They're unconnected figures. So those ones tend to do well, but there's certain kinds of horror that need bigger budgets, like post-apocalyptic. You can do it on a low budget, but it people are thinking it'll be I Am Legend, and so they're going to want an I Am Legend budget, which is much more studio than it is indie. So I think that any film can be in profit if you make it for a lowest amount of money. It's sort of an asinine thing to say, but it is worth remembering that it isn't inherent in the project. It's in the combination that you put together and where you end up on the bottom line. How much have you actually spent? What deals have you made with people? That's what's going to dictate whether you make money or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I will put a link to the horror report in the
Thank you.
description for this episode. So then looking forward to the future, we're obviously in a bit of a slump with film production. No one seems to have any money to make anything at the moment. And it feels like everyone's cutting their budgets. What do you think the future looks like?
So I used to follow the narrative of the British film industry or the global film industry or indie film industry, whichever sort of put upon group you want to pick. I used to follow the narrative as much as everybody else until I started reading about film history. And I read about the state of the British film industry in the first quarter of the last century, so 1920s, whatever. And there were questions in Parliament about, like, but now that the film industry is in decline, and now that the Americans are taking over, we must have quotas or whatever it would be. And as you read forward into the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, like, well, now that we're in decline and this threat has come, and then I remember my version of that being like, well, no longer is this thing, and it's in perpetual decline, but in a way that is sustainable in a very weird sense. So my sort of slightly weird pep talk for filmmakers is that you've never had it good. It's always been crap, and that's where we thrive. And so
Lovely.
it's not worse than it was, because it couldn't have
Mm,
got worse, and it can only get better. It won't, but it can only get better. And so I think you make do and you make it work. And certainly there are things that have radically transformed over the last 30 years. The number of films being made is almost 10 times more. So in the 80s, it might have been 150 horror films a year were made, and now it's 1,500. So there are some things that are just fundamentally different. But the plight of somebody who wants to put their art on the screen and wants to do it in a business-like way is the same. No one is going to love your film as much as you. Most people are completely indifferent. No one's against you. You're going to have to do 100 things for one to work. But if you do 200 things, 2 things might work. And if you do 1,000 things, maybe 10 things will work. I can't remember who said it, but there is a quote about, success is all down to luck. And I find the harder I work, the luckier I get.
mm.
And it's just that. So I'm not suggesting don't moan, because moaning is part of the essence of being a filmmaker and an artist and a Brit or whatever. But at the same time, just know that this is the game. This is what you're doing. It's like in Bill and Ted, where they fall and they're like, ah, and then it cuts to like a few minutes later and they're still falling and they're like, ah. Cuts to 5 minutes later and they got magazines and they're like, ah, because they're in like, I don't know, wind tunnel or something. But like, that's what we're in. We're in a perpetual state of falling, but this is what sustainability looks like. And it's not going to get better next year. It's not going to get worse next year. It's going to be a different version of this. So get comfortable, get good at this. As I said, I'm not saying don't moan, but know to yourself that this is it. This is what
Yeah.
it looks like. And yet, that's always been the case. And everyone before you has made the films you've seen. So it's not dire. It's just not fun. It's just really, 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 really hard. And you chose it. So, I feel sorry a bit. What is it? I have empathy and not sympathy. I think I'm going to go, yeah, that sucks, but it's your fault. But it
Your
must
fault.
suck.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that pep talk. I
Did it
needed
work?
that.
Sometimes
I'm
people are
not
like, wow,
sure.
I
I
feel
don't
fired
know.
up. Other times, not so much.
I'm not sure. A filmmaker I chatted to on here used the term, which I always quote now, which I love, is filmmaking is the most miserable fun you'll ever have.
Oh, that's superb.
Miserable fun. And last one on this would be AI.
Mhm.
So controversial for creatives, and I know you've done some experimenting with AI scripts and stuff. Where
Yeah.
do you stand on it all?
I think at the moment where it is that AI is fantastic for transforming things. It's not very good for creating things because it's derivative and also designed to shoot in the middle. And it's not very good at creating the final output because it is, for the same reason, derivative, or it's got a very particular style or language. So I don't use it to come up with stuff and I don't use it to write stuff. But in the middle, it's been transformative. I mean, for me, I deal with lots of data, but I haven't. Last time I studied anything to do with maths or something was 15 years old. I don't know how to code, but I don't need to, because I say to ChatGPT, give me Python code that will take this spreadsheet and then pull out all the things with an F in it and then sort them alphabetically. And it goes, okay, here's the code. And I run the code and it does the thing. So transforming stuff is fantastic. I know a friend who had a script that was based in America and it needed to be set in Britain. And so he said, here's the script. Tell me what kinds of things I need to change. And it found amazing things like bodegas. That's not a language that we use in the UK. We say corner shops, or that they often have delis in bodegas. They don't have them in corner shops, so that bit where they buy some meat from the corner shop won't work. Like, it can be really useful in tasks, but you can't rely on it, and it's not the output. I mean, I don't know here, but I can't, unless the speed of, or even direction of travel of improvement slows down, which there's no sign it will. It should at some point, but if everything carries on the trajectory we're on, it will create brilliant scripts, brilliant video. You will never need to write or shoot anything ever again. However, we will, because we don't need vinyl records. I don't need artisan cheese. In fact, we don't need 99% of the calories we buy. We want them. We like handmade. We like the perspective. So it might be a smaller industry, but there'll always be an industry of creatives because so many things have been invalidated. We don't need to write things down. We don't need printed books. Now we have Kindles, and I love reading a printed book, and I don't own a Kindle. So I'm not concerned for it, but it'll be radically different than it is now. And I think there is a lot of creative destruction on the, coming in the next 10 years. And the idea that we could strike about it or complain about it or tweet about it and it make any difference is totally human and understandable. But just, we are playing violins on the Titanic, but we should realize it's not necessarily sinking, it's changing. There are other ships, there are other things. It's just that we all have loss aversion. It's so easy to see what we're going to lose because we know we're going to lose it, but it's so hard to see what we're going to gain. But you try going back to the 1950s or the 1850s and tell people there, like, imagine somebody who rears horses in 1870 and be like, yeah, no, that's not a thing anymore. But that human being and what they loved about horses or doing their job, there'll be other jobs for them. And so the earlier you can embrace it and try and identify what those new roles for creatives are going to be, the quicker you'll be able to jump onto the next sinking ship, and then the next, and then the next, and then you die. I don't know. Again, I'm not sure whether I'm an inspirational speaker or not, but I don't think burying the head in the sand, I don't think banning people from doing things is going to make a jot of difference.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you'd like to hear from more industry professionals, how they got into the business and how you can do the same, or you just want to listen to some cool stories from movie sets around the world, then please do subscribe to the Honest Filmmaker podcast.